Nebraska's old athletics director, Bill Moos, recently released a book, which really asks an important question of who's buying that? Who is reading that? Who's spending the money on that? I think Nebraska has very passionate fans, but they even have a limit. And this book, 700 pages long. What is in there? 700 pages long? Britney Spears released a book, 288 pages. You mean to tell me Bill Moos has more to write about in life than Britney Spears? Now, I personally have no intention of ever reading 700 pages on Bill Moos. I'm not doing it, but some brave soul out there did. Someone out there took one for the team and let us know that there were like two notable things in that 700 pages. And I want to discuss one of them today. You may have seen this already. It was in the headlines. Bill Moos, in this book, somewhere between page 1 and 700, said that he had regretted Nebraska moving to the Big Ten from the Big 12. In that post-COVID era, he was trying to get Nebraska to go back to the Big 12. That he was like scheming up a secret operation and talking to other athletics directors and conference commissioners to try to get Nebraska to move back. I find this very funny because, like, why are you even writing about it? You didn't do it. Like, nothing even happened out of it, you know? Ooh, you wanted to do something and you didn't. That's great. What is in that 700 pages? Because here's the thing. We should be grateful that Nebraska didn't go back to the Big 12 because it would have been a 900-page book at that point. He would have had something to actually write about. His reasoning in this book of why he wanted Nebraska to go back to the Big 12 was that he was hearing from fans that it was just like too difficult for them to travel, which I think is a valid concern. I don't know if that's, change our entire conference level of concern. Also, if it were me, I personally would have just assumed like, oh, we're really not winning that much. That probably would have been the bigger reason, but what do I know? I didn't write a book. And as much as I think that whole excerpt is like a nothing burger because it's just him being like, I thought about doing this, but I didn't, it has got me thinking just about some of the decisions that Nebraska has made in the last 20 or so years. Because I've talked a lot about sort of the downfall of Nebraska football because it's a really interesting story to me. And to be honest, it's a little bit funny. But something that I realized is I think I failed in factoring in how much the move from the Big 12 to the Big 10 played a factor in Nebraska not really being a premier program in college football anymore. For me, I had focused so much on the bad hires, which are a huge reason of why Nebraska football has not been great. The Mike Riley era, the Scott Frost era, but there were so many other factors that I guess I just sort of ignored because I was so interested in hearing Scott Frost talk about why he was mad at his players wearing sweatshirts. I'm sorry, that was the headline that grabbed my attention and it always will be. So I want to take a look at Nebraska's move from the Big 12 to the Big 10 and why it probably didn't work out the way they wanted it to. Back in 2011, that is when Nebraska officially made the jump from the Big 12 to the Big 10, and they made this move for one simple reason. It is the reason that every school moves from conference to conference. They did it for money. The Big 10 is simply a more lucrative conference. Whatever conference Ohio State is in will always have a lot of money. And so the Big 10 is in a good position here. And Nebraska sees that there is a financial opening. You will make more money being in the Big 10. And at the time of Nebraska moving from the Big 12 to the Big 10, they were not sort of this really desperate football program that we've seen the last 5+ years. They were winning, maybe not to a national championship extent like they did in the 90s, but they were not a bad football program by any means. But they've come to the Big Ten and had really not much success at all. I think they're 85-87 since joining the conference. They do not have a winning percentage above 500 since joining the Big Ten. That's not ideal, especially when that's a football program with history. But honestly, I think more importantly that a football program that's fans are insane. They are so ridiculously passionate and they care so deeply. And they have seen nothing but just kind of like slop for a while now. Now, I mentioned it earlier, but I just need to specify it again. I do think a giant reason for Nebraska's downfall has been how bad the hires they made were with Mike Riley and Scott Frost. And I promise you we will do a video on just sort of the nightmare of those two hires and everything that has gone wrong with Nebraska since Bo Pelini. But I really want to focus on just the jump to the Big Ten today. And so here are some of the other factors that I think really tied into why this move just hadn't worked out for Nebraska. And one of the big reasons is actually something that I never even considered. I heard Dan Wetzel and Reese Davis talking about it on the College Game Day podcast, and I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. It's something I've never thought about before. When Nebraska was in the Big 12, they were probably top of the conference when it comes to resources, just in terms of what the stadium is like and tradition and fans and, facilities and all of those things. And that was something that Nebraska was competing against, Iowa State and Kansas for, like, okay, yeah, obviously our stadium and game day environment is going to be better than those schools, not to pick on those schools for any particular reason. And then you jump to the Big Ten and you're like, wow, there are several stadiums here that have a capacity over 100,000 people, that have resources that are better than ours, that have fans that are just as passionate as ours. And they sort of lose that advantage when you go to the Big Ten because Ohio State and Iowa State have very, very different resources. And Nebraska, prides itself on, we have a great stadium, we have great fans, great traditions, including the sellout one, which I do think is a scam. I do not think that one is real, but whatever. And you lose that competitive advantage when you go to the Big Ten because, everybody's got that. Not ever, Purdue doesn't have it, but you know what I mean. And that was a point Wetzel made that I'd never thought about before, that Nebraska's big recruiting pitch for where they were and the competition they had, that was no longer an advantage when you're competing for the same guys with these schools that have the exact same thing as you do. It's a very classic case of, do you want to be big fish in a small pond or small fish in a big pond? Or as I like to call it, big fish in a Crab Creek Chronicle, which is the name of Bill Moose's book. Yeah, the Crab Creek Chronicles. There's a whole nother 2 sentences after that in the title that I can't remember. But I'm shocked the name wasn't already taken. And I think, so yes, you move up to a level where financially things are better for other schools and they've had access to a little bit more money than you for a while now. You're also losing sort of the familiarity of the competition you have faced, where something I love so much about that era of college football was how these conferences really had these deeply ingrained football identities, where the Big 12 played a certain style of football and the Pac-12 played a certain style of football and the Big 10 did, and they were very different. And so you're going from a conference where the style of play is very different from the one you're in to the one you're jumping to. And Nebraska is not on the far end of that spectrum. I'm not saying Nebraska was like Mike Leach, Texas Tech air raid offense. That was not happening, but it's very different from going to playing fun Oklahoma State and Texas Tech's offense to Iowa and Wisconsin. That is a different style of football that you need different type of players for, different coaches for. And so you lose that sort of familiarity, and you're also at a disadvantage because they all know each other and they've all been playing each other for a long time. And it's not like Nebraska doesn't have, previous rivalries with some of the schools in the Big Ten, because there is a level of regionality there, but you are completely changing up your competition in a very night and day way. And to prove that, I believe that's the first time in history anyone has ever used Texas Tech football and Iowa football in the same sentence. And then this isn't necessarily a reason why I think Nebraska hasn't succeeded in the Big Ten, but it does just make you a little bit sad that you are losing some of those rivalries like Nebraska-Colorado and some of the regionalism and just sort of community and tradition that you had built up being in the Big 12 for so long. And I don't think that really played a huge impact in Nebraska's move, but it's just sort of a casualty of the new sort of capitalism, money-based mindset of college football, which college football has always been about money in one way or another, but maybe not to the extent we've seen it now. And so that's just something I'm tired about. You have all these changes happening. You're moving conferences. You're having issues with head coaches, which we will get to, I promise. It's good stuff. And you're going to the Big Ten where things are so established as is, where you had some of the longest tenured coaches in college football with Kirk Ferentz and Pat Fitzgerald, and you always know what you're getting from Ohio State, and you always know what Michigan is going to look like, and you understand what Wisconsin football is going to look like until they hire Luke Fickell and they make everything kind of crazy and weird and makes a lot of bad decisions, but that's a point for another day. And you don't have that identity anymore. And those things that propelled you are no longer advantages. And you're just stuck here trying to figure yourself out where everyone else already knows. And so you jump conferences being we're Nebraska football. We've won a national championship in the last 30 years. We're going to compete with Ohio State and Michigan, and you haven't competed with Iowa. You left a conference where you were top dog for a while to be at the same level as Minnesota. And I'm not trying to make fun of Minnesota here. That's not what this video is, but that's a crazy move to make. You have to acknowledge what the goal was here, which you moved to the Big Ten for things that are better academics and we align more and better resources, but you did it for money. And why do you want money in college football? Because you take that money and you reinvest it into your program and you get more wins, and when you win, you get more money, but they haven't won. You got this cash, but you haven't done anything with it to actually help your program win. So you kind of look at it like, well, this doesn't necessarily feel like it was worth it because the only advantage hasn't paid off for us. Literally has not paid off. That's why hindsight is 2020 in the Crab Creek Chronicles, as I've always said. You never know exactly how anything's going to play out, but it doesn't feel like that far of a stretch to say, you know what, maybe Nebraska would have been better off staying in the Big 12. Maybe the butterfly effect of that is you stay in the Big 12, obviously you're getting less money, but you continue to win more, and maybe you're not so quick to fire Bo Pelini for 9 wins, and then you don't end up with Mike Riley, and then the Scott Frost timeline doesn't work out. Maybe Nebraska's not necessarily in this like deep dark hole they're in now, and you're in a conference that has an automatic playoff spot with lesser competition, and that may have helped Nebraska in the long run, but you'll never know. Maybe that's what the other 696 pages in the Crab Creek Chronicles are about. What would have happened? I don't know. And as much as this video is clearly about Nebraska's move from the Big 12 to the Big 10, this applies to a lot of schools who have made jumps from what they consider to be a lesser conference to a bigger one, and it just hasn't paid out. We talked about it on this channel just a couple weeks ago. Rutgers decided to join the Big 10 and has only lost like $500 million since doing that. And you see that a lot with so many of these programs that had identities in these regionalized conference who left for money, who left for a bigger paycheck, and it just hasn't worked out. I would say it's probably not worked out more than it has. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting case study that I think applies to a lot of different schools. But I promise that on this channel, we will put together a guide to my favorite Scott Frost moments at Nebraska. We will talk about some of the crazy hiring decisions that have happened in that athletics department. I pinky swear. But until then, you have to subscribe to this channel because you only have two options. You subscribe to this channel and you watch all my videos, or you have to read Bill Moose's book. Those are your only two choices, so pick wisely.